Good afternoon. We will begin with the not the Vajradhara lineage prayer, with the refuge in bodhicitta. So please think to yourself as you recite this that you are taking refuge in the three jewels from now until the time that you achieve perfect enlightenment, and that until such time you will engage in the practice of the six transcendences in order to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So thinking in this way, please recite the prayer. O Sanje Chedan Soki Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dani Jabsum Je Dagi Jin Soki Besunam Je Drola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sanje Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Parado Dane Chapsum Je Dagi Jin Sogi Besanam Je Drola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Zemjen Tamje Dewa Tan Dewe Judan Drawar Jurje Donga Da Donga Ji Judan Drawar Jurje Donga Mebe Dewa Tamba Tam Min Drawar Jurje Nyeren Shadan Nidan Rawe Tanyon Shembola Nebrajurche. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly. My mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious root Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now think to yourself as that we must do everything we can to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings, as limitless as space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do this, we must engage in listening, contemplating, and meditating. And so today we are engaging in listening to the Dharma, and so please listen with this motivation of bodhicitta. The Dharma we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his shorter commentary called Youthful Play. And of the 8 chapters of the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma, we are speaking about the third, the teachings on the world, and this has 2 parts. It has the world of sentient beings and the external world environment that contains them. The world of sentient beings has 5 topics. Of them, we've gone through the first, the classification of wanderers who are born, and we're now on the second, the nature of interdependence, the manner of birth. And within this nature of independence, the manner of birth, we are talking about the understanding the links of the nature of interdependence. And so within this, we are speaking about the essence of each link. And so we began this section yesterday. And we went through the 3 of the links, or 3.5. We went through the links of ignorance, the name as part of name and form, contact, and half of the discussion of feeling. We went through the general discussion of feeling, which talks about how there are 6 different feelings, 5 bodily, and the other mental. But then there's a difference between these types of feelings. The 5 bodily feelings, that is, the feelings that we have associated with eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, and body consciousness. These 5 types of feeling can only go with sensory perception, right? whereas mental feeling primarily goes with our thoughts. Now there is, in other presentations, not so much here in the Great Exposition, so I don't know if it is part of it. In other presentations, there is a description of mental perception. However, that is not clear in the Abhidharma, and it's really not something we need to worry about right now. Primarily, when we talk about the mind, we're talking about the mental consciousness, we're talking about thought, conceptual thought, right? So we're thinking about, so this is, it's different than a sensory consciousness. A sensory consciousness, as we described the other day, will look at a blue object and see it for what it is, but it will not attach any name to it. The mental consciousness, as contrast, has this idea of blue, and it thinks it sees it, but it doesn't really actually see it. It has kind of a hazy image, kind of a constructed hazy image of it, rather than being a nice clear perception. So there's a difference between these two. That difference is clarified more in the texts on validity, but here the basic difference is that the five sensory consciousnesses are non-conceptual in the sense that they don't have thought. Particular types of thought, that is. They do have some types of thought. They don't have thoughts that remember, thoughts that attach names. And so here, when we talk about this difference means that the mental consciousness, the feeling of the mental consciousness is different than the feelings in the sensory consciousnesses, because in the sensory consciousnesses, the feelings can only engage a present object of their own kind. The eye can only see forms. The eye cannot hear sounds unless you have achieved a certain level, but we'll not go into that. Generally, the eye can only the eye can only see sounds, so the ear can only, I'm getting mixed up. I'm having synesthesia with my tongue. The eye can really only see forms. The ear can only hear sounds. The eye cannot see a past form. The eye cannot see yesterday's form or tomorrow's form. The eye can only see now. It can't even see an hour ago or even a second ago or a second into the future. It can only see now. And it's similar with all the sensory objects of all the other consciousnesses. They operate now. The mental consciousness is different. The mental consciousness is able to see not able to see anything. It is able to think about the objects of all the different consciousnesses. Unlike the eye consciousness can only apprehend form, but the mental consciousness can apprehend form, sound, scent, taste, touch, and dharmas, all 6 types of objects. Not only that, with your mind you can think about past objects and future objects, as well as present objects. So the mind engages on all 3 times. And so the other difference is that when you another significant difference is when you see something with the sensory consciousness, that sensory consciousness is kind of renewing itself in every moment, but it's only seeing the present thing. And as the object changes, the sensory consciousness also changes. In fact, it's a different sensory consciousness arising in every moment, because it's momentary. Because it's always changing, it doesn't really have it doesn't have any thought. It doesn't really have any continuity of thought. It can only engage something so much. Whereas the mind is different, because you can see something and that can set you off on a whole train of thought. Right? You see something, or you hear something, you feel something, you smell something, and you think, oh, smells good, or you think it smells, and then you start thinking about how you're hungry or so forth. Or you might taste something that'll remind you of grandma's cooking or something, I don't know. Whatever it is, it can set off a whole strain of thought. So for that reason, the feelings that are associated with the mental consciousness are different in quality. And so they're what we call movement of the mind. And so this is what we're describing now. We're on the kind of 3/4 of the way down, page 243, a specific explanation of mental feeling. This has 3 topics: an overview, explanation, and summary. It's the overview, and that has 18 types as well because of movement of the mind. So that, meaning the mental feeling, has 18 types. That mental factor feeling itself is presented as having 18 types as well because of the movement of the mind. So when you have the mental factor of feeling that is associated with the mental consciousness, then there are 18 different types, because there are 3 different types of pleasure associated with this consciousness: mental pleasure, mental unhappiness, and neutral. These 3 types of feelings associated with the mental consciousness. And then there are 6 different types of objects. There's form, sound, scent, taste, touch, and dharmas. We've got 6 consciousnesses. 6 times 3 equals 18. So that means we have 18 different movements of the mind. So that means you can have like a feeling of pleasure toward a visual form, a feeling of displeasure or unhappiness towards a mental form, or towards a visual form. You can have a neutral feeling towards a visual form. Same with the sounds. You can have either a pleasant, mentally pleasant or happy, unhappy or displeasure, unhappy or feeling of displeasure, or a neutral feeling. So with all 6, you can have all 3. And the other thing that happens is that these really help the mind, or they really cause the mind to stick on what they're talking about. Now, so this is translated into Tibetan as Niwar Yua, and in English I translated it as movement of the mind. I get the mind to move toward an object. The Sanskrit word is manopivachara. So mano means mind, upa means close. Vichara has a couple of different meanings. Often it means consideration, but the Tibetan translators translate it as moving close to. And I think that they probably did this in consultation with Indian Panditas. So if you look in the translations of the auto commentary that come out of the Sanskrit, the translators, so there was first it was Louis de Vallée-Poussin, who was a great scholar, a Belgian scholar in the first part of 20th century, and then later either Leo Prudin in the late 20th century, mid to late 20th century, or Lodar Sampo in the 21st century. They all were primarily working from the Sanskrit, so they talk about it as being like pondering or thinking or considering. This word vichara is actually what I also translate earlier as the mental factor of examination. But the Tibetans translate it as going towards, and that is one meaning of the Sanskrit word upavachara is like an environment. So it's like moving towards that. Because what happens is that the mind, it has a feeling and it goes toward an object. Because of that feeling, it's more likely to stick on that object. Like when you see something attractive, when you see an attractive person, if you are not free of desire and you see an attractive person, you're going to have trouble taking your eyes off of them. If you smell fresh bread in the oven, you're going to have trouble thinking about anything other than fresh bread, and you will really want to buy that house, which is why realtors have people advise people to bake bread on days when their houses are being shown. So like you have these associations of pleasant smell, a pleasant sound, it attracts your mind. Similarly, an unpleasant sound or unpleasant smell also causes movement of the mind. Now, I'm not certain, it's not so easy to see this on with the neutral feelings, but there must also be some sort of thing. So these feelings kind of get the mind hooked, to put it on a very colloquial side, where they get the mind hooked on the object. And so for this reason, they're always defiled. They're always working in terms of our desire or our aversion. Right? So they're always defiled. That point comes up later. Now, the meaning of movement, there are 2 different ways that the meaning of movement is described in the text. And so as it says at the top, as it says, the following appears in Great Chim's commentary. So this is the Ornament of Abhidharma by Chim Jambayang. And he writes, the Great Exposition proposes that feeling moves to the object on the support of the mind as its mount. And the Sutra school says that the mind moves to the object on the support of feeling. So you've got 2 different ways of looking at it. So the one is that like the mind goes towards the object and the feeling kind of comes along with it. That's what is attributed here to the Great Exposition. And the other is that the Sutra school says that the mind moves to the object on the support of feeling, so that the feeling engages the object, and then that instigates the mind to move towards the object. So there are these two different explanations of it. One is like the mind goes to the object, and then the feeling kind of latches on. The other is that the feeling gets the mind, instigates the mind to move to the object. So if you look at the translation of the ornament of Abhidharma, you'll see in there that he translates this term not just as movement of mind, but as the instigator of movement of mind. So it's what makes the mind move toward the object. And actually, this quote, when I looked through his translation, my copy of the actual text of the actual Tibetan is in Nepal, so I couldn't look at it. And I suppose I could have looked online to see if I could find it, but perhaps I was lazy. At any rate, I didn't see anything exactly like this in the Chim, but it does kind of point out some of the major differences that are the basic differences. Is it the mind that's going and taking the feeling with it, or is it the feeling that's causing the mind to go? So now when we look at that, there are different types of objects, and so we then it's looked at in kind of detail. And so the explanation is, looking at it in detail, says this has three topics. An explanation of feelings of the desire realm, of form, and of formless. So we begin with an explanation of the feelings of desire realm. So here we mean mental feelings. And so the feelings on desire realm, they can either focus on their own level, or they can focus on the level of form, or they can focus on formless, because this is mental, right? So the mental, you can think about anything in the desire realm, you can think about the humans and gods and all that. You can think about the form realm, you can think about the formless realm, and in that way you can have the mental feelings. So, as it says, in terms of focusing on own level, that means focusing on desire. And, it says, in desire, all focus on their own. In the realm of desire, there are all 18 of those movements of mind. They all focus on their own level. So when you have a mental faculty, or a mental consciousness, if a desire realm being has a mental consciousness, that mental consciousness is on the level of desire, and it focuses on can focus on any of the different objects, form, sound, scent, taste, touch, and dharmas, and and it can have any of the three feelings, so that's 18, and they're all on their own level. So own level means the level of desire. They're not looking at form, not looking at formless here, all on the level of desire. Now, when they're looking at different levels is what comes up next. So focusing on form. In 33b, the line 33b says, and 12 can have form in their sphere. So we can have 12 of those movements of mind can go towards the form realm. So we're missing 6. What 6 are we missing? And there are 12 movements of mind of desire, it says in the commentary, that can have form realm in their sphere. Since there is no scent or taste there, the 6 that focus on those two are not included. So this is described in the first chapter of the book. So those of you who were here last year should remember. Those of you who took the class last year should remember. We weren't here. We were in Nepal. Anyways, those of you who took the class last year should remember, but some of you might not, and people who didn't take the class last year and have not yet studied Abhidharma have no hope. So why is there no scent or taste on the realm of form? So it's like we were talking about a few days ago. I think on the first or second day we talked about what is it that distinguishes the desire realm. You have the desire for food and sex. And so on the form realm, you're free of both of those desires. And because there is no food, we don't even have to mention sex. In terms of the food, because there's no food, there is therefore no scent and no taste, right? Because we primarily use those for sniffing out food or for tasting food. So on the form realm, there's no food, there's no desire for food. Why would you even need those faculties? So there's no scent or taste on the form realm, right? So therefore, the mental pleasure, the mental displeasure, and the neutral that would focus on those two don't happen. Therefore, there are 6 mental feelings that you don't have when you're a desire realm consciousness looking at form. And then when you look at the formless, the 3 on higher, the 3 feelings of desire that focus on dharmas only can focus on the higher formless, because the 3 feelings of desire that focus on dharmas only can focus on the higher formless, because that only probably should be moved in that sentence. Where did I put my pencil? Only the 3 feelings of desire that focus on dharmas can focus on the higher formless, because the 5 objects of form and so forth do not exist there. So that means that we have the 6 objects, generally form, sound, scent, taste, touch, and dharmas. So only dharmas is on the formless realm, because there is no form, as in the big form, not just the little visual form, but this includes all of the sound and scent and so forth. So there are no objects of sensory consciousness on the form realm. Therefore, you can't think about any sounds on the form realm, because there aren't any. Right? So you can only, as the desire realm being, you could have a consciousness that thinks about the formless realm with pleasure, and then is concurrent with a pleasant, unpleasant, mentally unhappy, or neutral feeling. But you can't do that with any other object, because they're not there. So that's the feelings of the desire realm. Then we move on to the feelings of the form realm, and this has 2 topics, explaining the feelings of the first 2 dhyanas and then of the higher 2 dhyanas. Now, the reason why these 2 are separated out into different categories is that the 4 levels of form have different characteristics. Among them are different types of feeling. So the mental feelings are really only happening on the first of pleasure. The mental feelings of pleasure are only happening on the first 2 levels of dhyana, and not on the 3rd or 4th. So that's why they're separated out into 2 categories. So this has 3 points. So this has 2 points, excuse me. So there are 2 topics here explaining the feelings of the first 2 dhyanas, that is the first and second, and then of the higher 2 dhyanas, the 3rd and 4th. So explaining the feelings of the first 2 dhyanas, there are 3 points. Focusing on objects of desire. So you have a form realm being who is thinking about the desire realm. And they're on the first or the second dhyana. On 2 dhyanas are 12 which can move toward desire. So they can have 12 mental feelings. They have thoughts that can be concurrent with 12 different types of mental feelings in looking at desire. So, as it says, on the first 2 dhyanas, as there is no mental unhappiness, nor its 6 movements, there are the remaining 12, which can move toward desire, because they all can focus on or perceive its 6 objects. Okay? So you have the feelings, the being on the form realm. Once you have achieved the dhyana, you have no more displeasure, no more mental unhappiness, unpleasant feelings of mind. They just don't happen, because you're on a level of equipoise. And at that level of equipoise, there's no feeling of suffering of any kind, no pain, and no displeasure either. For that reason, when the being on the form realm looks or thinks about the 6 objects of the form realm, then they can have either a happy, a mentally pleasant feeling, or they can have a neutral feeling. So 2 times 6 is 12. Clear? Then focusing on form, when they think about the form realm, so they're thinking about their form realm, 8 focus on their own. So you have mental consciousness is associated with 8 different feelings that focus on objects of their own level, either their first or second dhyana. There are 8 movements to the 4 objects, except for the 4 that move to scent and taste, that focus on their own level of form. So they can think about, we have the 6 basic classes of objects, right? Form, sound, scent, taste, touch, and dharmas. So that's 6, but there's no scent and no taste, so that leaves 4 So that means they can have either neutral or mentally pleasant feelings, which means that means 8. Now, when that same being looks towards the formless realm, on the formless realm there's no form, so there's only one dhyana, right? The 2 on formless. So the being on the first 2 dhyanas can think about the formless realm and have 2 types of mental feeling, either pleasant thinking about dharmas or neutral thinking about dharmas. Dharma alone is the object of the 2 feelings, mental pleasure and neutral, when focusing on the formless. Explaining the feelings of the higher 2 jhanas. So this has 3 points, focusing on desire. So in the higher 2 jhanas, you no longer have any mental pleasure. Mental pleasure is possible on the first 2 jhanas, but when you get to the 3rd type of dhyana, you have a funny kind of pleasure that they call cognitive pleasure. I mentioned this a couple days ago. We talked about it at length last year. But it's not the same as mental pleasure. It's different. It's actually classified as a type of regular pleasure faculty, not as mental pleasure. So it's not mental pleasure, it's different. Even though we call it cognitive pleasure, it's different. Just trust me on this one, because we discussed it last year and I don't want to go back into it right now. It's too confusing. So there's no mental pleasure on either the 3rd or the 4th dhyana. So that means on the 3rd and 4th dhyana, you don't have mental pleasure. You don't have displeasure because you're on the level of dhyana in general. So you're only left with one feeling, right? Neutral. The higher 2 dhyanas have only the 6 movements of neutral feeling. The other, mental pleasure, is not present because it has been abandoned. Those 6 focus on all 6 objects of desire. So when the being on the 3rd or 4th dhyana is thinking about the desire realm, they can think about all 6 objects and they can feel neutrally towards them. And then the next, it says focusing on the form realm. So when they're focusing on their own level, there are 4 objects of its own form realm because there is neither scent nor taste. So it can focus with the neutral feeling only towards the form, sound, touch, and dharmas of the form realm. So that's the 4 towards the form realm. And 1 can focus on the higher. So the 1, neutral feeling, can focus on the object of dharma only of the highest formless realm. So now we've come to the feelings of the formless realm. In the formless realm, here Vasubandhu brings out the preparation for the formless, in particular the preparation for the first level of formless, the level of infinite space. He brings that out as a separate category. Now the preparations for formless realm are what you do in preparation. They're the method that you follow in order to achieve the formless realm. So they aren't actually the actual absorption of the formless realm. Instead, you do these preparations on the level of the 4th dhyana, because it's the subtlest of the minds below the form. It's the subtlest of the minds in the form realm. It's a very, very strong and workable state of mind. And so that is the basis that you can do the preparations for the formless realm on. On the preparations for the formless, 4 move towards form. So on the preparations for formless of infinite space, the focus is on 4 objects because they move towards the 4th dhyana of form. So they focus on its form, sound, feeling, and dharma. So when you're doing this meditation, you have you're on the 4th dhyana, and you are thinking, these forms of the 4th dhyana, subtle though they may seem, are still coarse in comparison. Everything is infinite, space is infinite, and this is the kind of thinking that you go through to achieve the formless realms. And so as you're thinking about that, you kind of have a revulsion for you're saying that you want to free yourself from the attachment to those 4. So that's why you think about them. And when you think about them, you have a neutral feeling. Then when you are on that preparation and thinking about the formless realm that you're about to achieve, then you have 1 feeling, because you have the feeling, a neutral feeling towards the object of dharmas, and not the other objects because there's no form. So it says, one moves toward higher. On the preparation for infinite space, that is the first level of formless, one movement of neutral feeling that focuses on the object Dharma moves towards the higher formless realms. And on this, the second point here, so that's talking about the preparations. So the second is the actual absorptions. In actual one with own object. So in the four actual absorptions of formless and the preparations for the three higher levels, there is only one movement because those levels do not focus on desire or form, but focus only on their own level's Dharma as an object, with no other movement. There's nothing else to think about when you're on formless. Why bother thinking about the desire or form realm? You don't move there. You just stay right in the formless realm when you're there. So here, that's the breaking it down into the which ones are on which of the different levels, or in the different realms. So now we come to kind of summary of this, and it says all of the 18 are defiled. So all of the 18 movements of mind are defiled. So defiled means that it's something that can cause the afflictions to develop. When something is defiled, then the afflictions can develop in relation to it. So you have the feeling, like a pleasant feeling will help the affliction of desire and so forth develop. An unpleasant feeling will help aversion, hatred develop, and so forth. Because they propagate existence, so there are not any undefiled. So we think about what does it mean for this movement of the mind. What's kind of gets, to put it really colloquially, it's what gets the mind, the thought, to stick on an object. You've probably had these ideas, these times where you just can't get something out of your mind. And that's the mind sticking on it, right? That's like that movement of the mind. And this is accompanied by feeling. You have a song that you keep thinking about over and over again, this feeling of like this pleasant sound. You're thinking of your favorite, your favorite aria from your Puccini opera. Yes. Oh, okay, we better move on. So there are not any undefiled. The noble is entered without effort and enters the expanse with no attributes, but the movements are the opposite of that. So the noble, when you have an undefiled mental consciousness, that is what the noble beings, the stream enters and so forth have. When they are meditating on the nature, the 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths. So when they're thinking about the truths, they don't have these movement of mind, because the movement of minds kind of propagate existence, propagate becoming, right? They kind of cause the afflictions, and then as the afflictions develop, they turn into the entanglers that get us into action. In other words, they go from being craving to grasping and into becoming. And so, but the undefiled are the opposite of that. When you are looking at the truth of suffering, you're looking at all the phenomena that are results, the five aggregates that are results, and you see that they are impermanent, empty, selfless, and impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. And you really see that. You have that. When you're meditating upon that, that counteracts becoming. So therefore, those are not considered the movements of the mind. So they enters the expanse with no attributes. It brings you towards the realization, the meditation, the absorption of cessation, and so forth, where you're not thinking about it. So the movements are opposite of that. So now we've been through the four links. We've been through ignorance, name, contact, and feeling. So of the 12 different links of interdependence, we've now talked about 4 in detail, but there are 8 remaining ones that we haven't yet talked about. And so here, this is what's the topic of the next section. It says, teaching that the other links are known from elsewhere. Others have been or will be explained. In that case, if this is a teaching on interdependence, why are only ignorance, name, contact, and feeling explained, and the others not? So you're talking about 4, you're not talking about the other 8. What is the reason? The other links of form, consciousness, and the six sense bases have already been explained, or formation, becoming, craving, and grasping will all be explained in the fourth and fifth areas. The remaining links, birth and aging and death, are not explained separately because they're included within the others. Okay? So what this is saying is that when you're talking about the links of form, the form as in name and form, that was explained in the first area. Consciousness was also explained in the first area. The six sense bases were explained in the first area. Now formation meaning karma, right? Becoming meaning karma. Those two are talked about in the fourth that we'll get to in a few days. Maybe a week or two. And then craving and grasping are types of afflictions that are talked about in the fifth area that we will get to next time. So these will be explained in the fourth and fifth areas. The remaining links, birth and aging and death, are not explained separately because they're included with the others. So they're not separate. For one thing, as we talked about, the birth is the same as the link of consciousness, right? And and aging and death is the same as the links from name and form up through contact, right? So those are all discussed elsewhere, so there's no need to talk about aging, birth and aging and death separately. They're kind of included, okay? So now we're getting to the next section about this, of the discussion on the nature of interdependence. I'm going to try what is the Trishi. So here this is section C, and the reason it's where are we? So the understanding the nature of interdependence. If we look back on page 234, you'll see that we have the outline there. Point 3, understanding the nature of interdependence. This is 4 topics: the periodic links of interdependence, the essence of each link, teaching the 3 all afflicted through examples, and teaching that these links as the 4 states. So we've now finished the second. So we've gone through the first and second, we've come to the third, teaching the 3 all afflicted through examples. So this is 3 different points. Now when we talk about the all afflicted, what we're talking about are basically these 12 links of interdependence, primarily. But it also talks about other things. But when we're talking about the 12 links of interdependence, they're divided kind of into three types. There are afflictions, there's karma, and they're the basis, right? Because we have some of the links of interdependence are afflictions. So which links of interdependence are afflictions? Ignorance, craving, and grasping. Ignorance, craving, and grasping, all 3 of these are afflictions. So that's taught about as the all afflicted category of afflictions. Now, all afflicted is like a word that it's maybe a little bit overly literal translation. I will admit this. I may well change it the next edition, but I have not thought of a replacement term yet. Basically, it's saying that things that are either afflictions or that are affected by the afflictions. It's similar to saying the defiled. Could be synonymous, but it's slightly different. It's talking about specifically how it's afflicted. So there's the afflictions, and then the second type of all afflicted is karma. So karma we've talked about in the 12 links. So which of the 12 links of interdependence are karma? Formations and becoming. Now, isn't this interesting? When you look at the 12 links of interdependence, I don't know if I said this, you have these 2 links of karma, and both of them come right after links that are affliction. Right? So that's karma. And then what comes after the karma? You've got the bases. Right? So the bases are the remaining links, which are consciousness, name and form, six sense bases, contact and feeling, and then birth and aging and death. Okay. So we've got these three sort of categories. And so to talk about the afflictions. Teaching the all-afflicted afflictions through comparisons. In this, afflictions are like seeds, like nagas, and like trees, roots and trees, like husks as well, it is proposed. In this discussion, the afflictions are like seeds. So just as trunks and branches and leaves grow from seeds, afflictions, karma, and the bases grow out of the afflictions. So first, you have you plant a seed, and that seed then grows and it has a little shoot, and then that turns into, a sprout? The botanists in the room are going to have a field day with me here. The shoot, and then a sprout, and then it'll turn into a sapling, and then it turns into a tree, and then it bears fruit, right? So that seed, it's like what we would call a kernel of the affliction, and that kernel then develops into one of the other more manifest types of afflictions, and those develop into the entanglers, and they get you involved in action, and that action produces a fruit, the karmic result. Afflictions, karma, and the bases all grow out of the afflictions. So you have the afflictions that lead to the affliction, like craving, leading to grasping. Essentially is what we're talking about. And that grasping then that's an affliction, that leads into the karma of becoming, and that leads into birth and aging and death, which are the bases. They are like nagas. Just as a lake will not dry up if there is a naga in it, the lake of birth will not dry up if there is the naga of affliction. So as long as you have the naga of the afflictions, and then you're going to have the lake of birth continually taking rebirth. So there's just as lakes need nagas, we have the afflictions, and they're like the roots of a thicket. Just as if you do not pull those out, it will regrow even if you cut off the branches. If you do not pull the afflictions out from the root, wanderers will be reborn. So it's like if you have Japanese knotweed. It's almost impossible to get out. It's like in North America. In Japan, it's a different matter, I suppose. But in North America, Japanese knotweed is like one of the hardest invasive exotics to get out, because there's so many roots. If you don't get all of those roots out, it's almost impossible to remove your Japanese knotweed, and it'll crowd out everything else. So you have to get it out, and you have to extract all of the roots. So it's the same, similar with the afflictions. If you do not get all of the roots out, then that thicket of karma and afflictions and so forth will still be there, and you'll be unable to get rid of it. Just as if you do not pull the roots of the thicket out, it will regrow even if you cut off the branches. If you do not pull the afflictions out from the root, wanderers will be reborn. So if you don't eliminate them entirely, sometimes we like our afflictions. But that's another chapter. Let's think about that. And they're like trees. Just as trees produce fruits, flowers, and fruit in season, afflictions are the cause of afflictions, karma, and the bases. And the trees will, like if you have an apple tree, the apple tree will bear fruit year after year after year until at some point, of course, it grows too old, and that's where the comparison falls down, because the afflictions will keep going year after year after year without ever getting old unless you eliminate them. They are like the thick husks of rice grains as well, it is proposed. If there are the husks, the grains produce a crop, but without them they do not. So this is an interesting analogy, because you've got a grain, either a rice grain or you might think about a wheat grain. And when you first take it off, when it's first harvested, that grain has a husk. And at that point, you can take it in the husk and you can still plant it, and it'll grow. But once you have removed that husk, that grain cannot germinate. It will not grow. So you still have the meat of that grain, but you can't do it. Like if you take a piece of white rice and put it in the ground, is it going to grow anything? No. Why? Because the husk has been removed. Even if you have brown rice, they've taken enough of the husk off that it's still not going to grow. So if you remove the husk, then the grain cannot grow. So it's like the afflictions are the husk around karma. If you remove the afflictions, then karma cannot develop and cannot produce a result. There may still be karma there, but if you eliminate the afflictions, then the karma cannot do anything. The results of the karma can't affect you. For example, in this lifetime, if you eliminate all of your afflictions and you achieve the level of an arhat, because of your previous karma, you will still experience the ripening of karma. But because you don't have the husk of afflictions, then even though you experience the results of that karma, you will not be reborn and experience another suffering. To explain it from the perspective of the Great Exposition School. And the way you can think about it is like these stories of the great arhats who were murdered at the time of the Buddha. There are several who were murdered. The one is how much time do I have? Udayan. These classes are more interesting if you have a few diversions every once in a while. So Udayan was one of the gang of six. Who was one of they were the monks who misbehaved and who basically 3/4 of the rules were made because of the actions of the gang of six. So Udayan was one of them. They were kind of cheery guys, and everyone liked them. They were popular, but they just kept on misbehaving and more rules. And at some point, Udayan realized to himself, I've spent so much time, and here I am. I'm still just an ordinary being, and I've done so many bad things. And so he went and meditated, and he achieved the result of arhatship. And after he did this, after he became an arhat, he still was a very personable and likable fellow, and he could kind of understand people because he'd been there himself. And so he'd go out, and he was actually one of the best arhats at going out and actually speaking to people and teaching them and guiding them into the Dharma. So one day he was going on his alms round, and he's coming towards this house, begging for alms, and the woman, the man of the household, the husband had gone off on a business trip, gone off looking, some business trip. Merchants. They didn't call them business trips back then. He went off with a team of merchants to gather jewels on a treasure island, and the robber chief who had been living in the forest had come to visit the wife. And so he caught them in flagrante, shall we say. And the wife said to the robber, "You have to kill him, or he'll tell him. My husband will find out, and we'll be, he'll catch us." And the robber said, "But if I murder him, then the king will have us tied down and then stuck in a house of straw and burnt alive." And the woman said, "You have to kill him anyways." So Udayan came into the house, and the robber baron cut his head off. So this was the result of Udayan's karma, that he was killed. He was an arhat, so he was free of all afflictions, but because of the ripening of his karma, he was murdered like this. And then Udayan, of course, didn't come back from his alms round. They went looking for him, and they found out what had happened, and the woman and the robber were arrested by the king, put in a house made of straw that was lit by fire, and they were burnt alive. Okay, I think I've still got time to finish this section. I wanted to section even after that story. If there are husks, the grains produce a crop, but without them do not. Similarly, karma that has the husk of the attainment of afflictions leads to rebirth in the next lives, but without that, karma alone does not. The attainment of the afflictions means that if you possess afflictions in your being, if you still have the affliction of, it may not be a manifest affliction, but if you still have greed, hatred, desire, pride, doubt, or wrong view, those because you still have those in your being, even if they're not manifest. The karma, the actions that you do, will be able to produce life, produce a future lifetime. But if you don't have that, then an action alone is not going to be able to produce a next lifetime. So the next is teaching the all-afflicted karma through comparison. Karma is like rice within its husk, like medicine and flowers. So here, the rice within the husk, we just had the analogy, the afflictions is like the husk. So now you've got the grain of rice inside the husk. Without the husk, it can't develop, as we have just described. Karma is like rice within its husk, because just as if there is a husk, the germ of a grain of a rice grain produces a fruit. Karma that has the husk attained through the power of the afflictions, produces the result of birth. So you have the afflictions when you do the karma, then that karma can produce rebirth. If you don't, then it cannot. Karma is also like medicine that gives power to a single time. Karma also produces a single fully ripened result. So when you take a medicine, you have your one pill, whatever pill it is, you can only take that pill once, right? It only is going to affect you once. Otherwise, after that, it's gone. So it's like medicine. It can only give you a result once. And like flowers that are the proximate cause for the arising of fruit, karma is the proximate cause of full ripening, and the afflictions are the distant cause. So here, when you've got the tree, the fruit tree, the afflictions are like the seed that grew the tree, and then so forth. And you've got the proximate cause, which is that flower that appears in the springtime. And then that flower, if it's fertilized, will then make a fruit, right? So the flower is like the affliction, or is like the karma. The affliction would be further down and like the root, and the full ripening of the karma is that fruit that is going to ripen later. Teaching the all-afflicted bases through a comparison. So the bases, these are the other links, so the conception, consciousness through contact, birth and aging and death. These are like food and drink that have been got. The bases are like food and drink that have been got. For example, once food and drink has been obtained, it is no more than something to enjoy. Once you've laid the feast out on the table, the only thing you have to do is eat. So once there is consciousness and so forth, once there are so things, there's not much else that you can do with the bases other than use them. It is not something that needs to be produced again. Similarly, the fully ripened bases are also something to enjoy. And here, when we use the word enjoy, you can also think of it as in terms of use. It's a difficult word in Sanskrit and Tibetan to translate into English. It's kind of somewhere in between. It has kind of three sets of meanings. One is to enjoy, one is to use, another is to consume. They're merely something to consume and not to produce in other lifetimes, because after fully ripening, they have no connection to other full ripening in other lifetimes. So in other words, what this is saying, your body, for example, is one of the bases, the sixth sense bases and whatever, all of these here, this is only your body now. You can only use this body in this lifetime. When you die and you move on to your next lifetime, you're going to have another body that is the ripening of different karma. So this body now is one that all we can do with it is use it. Whether you use it for good or for ill is up to you. Or whether you use it or whether you're lazy is up to you. But it's only something that we can that can be used, and it's not something that we can even perpetuate for very long. It itself is changing all the time, and we certainly can't take it beyond the moment of death. Okay, so that teaches the meanings of the three types of the three types of all afflicted according to the analogies. The afflictions, the karma, and the bases are the all afflicted. So all of the 12 links are all afflicted, right? Because these are afflicted links. So now we have to see, well, how do these links, so this whole discussion the whole discussion of the links of interdependence came out of talking about the modes of birth, which are talking about the state of birth. We've got 4 states, right? We've got the state of birth. What's the second state? What comes after birth? This is the hard one, actually. It's a funny name. Previous state. That's the state of prior to death. Previous state, the state of death, and we've got the state of the between state, or pardo, right? Among these 4 states of existence, so that's the birth, previous, death, and bardo, the state of rebirth is afflicted by all the afflictions of its level, the others threefold, 3 in formless. The state of rebirth is afflicted by all the afflictions of its level. So, we have the 4 states, and so among the 4 states of existence, the between state, the state of rebirth, the previous state, and the state of death, the state of rebirth is always afflicted. This means at the moment that the bardo being enters the womb, or enters the heat and moisture, or wherever it is, or falls into hell, or goes up into the God realm, at that moment of birth, that is either the link of birth or the link of consciousness of the 12 links. At that moment, the mind is always afflicted. It always has attachment. It's always thinking me, at very least. It's clinging to the new body as being me. So it's always got that. So, and at that same time, so there's neither virtue nor unobscured neutral in that state. So that state of mind can either be a unvirtuous thought. It might be, for example, there's the thought of lust for the mother, or lust for the father, or whatever. Or there is some other sort of thought that might, unvirtuous thought that might happen, anger, hatred, or displeasure. If you're being reborn as, say, a hell or a hungry ghost, perhaps. And there's also the afflicted ego clinging, thinking me. Or it might be merely an an afflicted neutral state. So with neutral, we can have afflicted and unafflicted. Unafflicted is just kind of blah. Then we have afflicted neutral, would be like when you just have ego clinging, and it's not unvirtuous, but it's not virtuous either. It's just ego clinging on its own. For example, when someone is born in the form realm where there's no non-virtue, they can still have afflictions. They still have the ego clinging. So that would be an example of that. So it'd be an obscured neutral. Whatever level that state of rebirth it is afflicted by all the afflictions of its own level. That means if you are being reborn in the desire realm, you have all the afflictions of the desire realm. If you're being reborn at that state of rebirth, if you're being reborn in the form realm, you have all the afflictions of the form realm. And if you're being reborn in the formless realm, you have all the afflictions of the formless realm. These are described in detail in the 5th chapter. So we won't go into it in detail now, but you have all the afflictions of your own level. However, almost all, we should say, it is not afflicted by the 5 autonomous entanglers: jealousy, stinginess, regret, aggression, and concealment. So these 5 entanglers, so these are entanglers, if you recall, they're the sort of affliction that really get you worked up and going into an action. And sometimes these entanglers are concurrent or associated with another. They might be associated with another entangler, such as hatred or desire or lust or something like that. And sometimes they're autonomous, which means that they are not. The only other affliction that they'd be concurrent with would be ignorance. So these 5, the jealousy, stinginess, regret, aggression, and concealment. So concealment is basically trying to hide the faults that you have, keep people from seeing your faults. Now these 5 are not at the state of birth. The 3 states that are other than the state of rebirth, that is the between state, previous state, and the state of death, are threefold. They can be either virtue, afflicted, or neutral. So that means that in your, once you have taken rebirth, so in the previous state, you can have any sort of frame of mind. The moment of death, you can have any state of mind, and in the between state, you can have virtuous, unvirtuous, or neutral states of mind. Any of those three can happen in the other three states. So what this means in practice is that in order for us to have a virtuous state of mind at death, we have to train in virtue as much as we can now. Because we have to have control over our mind, be able to practice virtue, do as much virtue as we can now, habituate ourselves at virtue, so that at the moment of death, which is a pretty dramatic moment and a time where you might not have control over your mind, if you have developed the habituation so that you automatically have virtuous thoughts, you automatically recite mani mantras or meditate on compassion and loving kindness or think of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, then if you have that thought, that habit already, that will happen at the moment of death as well. So it's important during this lifetime to train ourselves as much as possible, so that at the moment of death, which is a critical moment, we can have that virtuous state of mind at the moment of death. Very important. There are three states, with the exception of the between state and formless, which implies that all four states are in desire and in desire and form. So there are three states. So that means that in the desire and form, we have all four states: the bardo, the birth, previous state, and death. But in the formless realm, there's no bardo, so there's only birth, previous state, and death. Okay, only those three. That's what it means. So with this, we have now completed the second section of the first half of the chapter. So that was the section about the nature of interdependence, the manner of taking birth. So that is a good stopping point for today. So now, please, let's think about dedicating the merit of today's listening and teaching to the Dharma, so that the virtue of teaching, and we dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma, so as kind of representative of all the good we've done in past lifetimes, or good that we ever will do, all the good that any sentient being has ever done or will ever do. And let's dedicate all this merit so that all sentient beings may be freed from the sufferings of samsara and achieve the state of Buddhahood, and in particular so that those who are suffering now from the pandemic and the secondary effects, the economic effects of the pandemic, that they may all achieve happiness in the short term and swiftly achieve Buddhahood. Osanam de tam che se bani tobne ne beranam pam che ne kyegana chi barla trobai si pezzole drova shom. Thank you.